really touched the wall. And one of those speeches is the war in Vietnam in terms of Dr. King's position in that war. And I think, I've been saying this, Bill Noakes, throughout the program, that this, in my view, is the most important foreign policy speech given in the last century by a non-politician, non-elected official.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And I look at this speech not only through the lens of foreign policy, but through the lens of Dr. King as a Christian minister. Because ultimately what he's addressing are issues that go beyond foreign policy. They go beyond beyond governmental affairs. They really address the issue of what kind of people are we to be?
Right. We're also live on social media here. Let's see who's joining us. Regina Daniels Thomas, also watching. Mark Rowland, John Cahalan, or I hope that's the way to pronounce it. Osama Siblani, the editor of the Arab American News. Erica Fandel, also a regular Facebook viewer here. Greg, I'm coming to you shortly. But what is interesting, though, Bill, is that when you listen to the speech, rarely have we seen someone make the argument between the demand for, or the deficit that exists in the demand for economic justice and this push for militarization, or what Eisenhower called the mighty military-industrial complex.
Well, Dr. King points that out, and there were others who pointed that out at this particular point in time during the mid-1960s. But the key thing is he's looking at it in terms of the moral arc of the universe.
Right.
How do we address one another as citizens? Not citizens of the United States or of Vietnam or of Russia or China, but citizens of the world, a world we have in common.
Right. Let me go to Greg. Greg, let me bring you in here in this conversation, and we'll come shortly to that speech that was delivered at Riverside. Greg, go ahead with your question or comment.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I think that the timeline we probably should think about too. When you talk about being at war for 30 years, we got into the Korean War in 1950, so it's been almost a constant state of war for America for a very long time. But when you listen to Dr. King, who I think is one of the greatest orators in world history, the hard part is learning implementation of what he was saying. How do we apply what he was saying to our daily lives, to the uplifting of us as a world and American people, and to make things the way they ought to be? That, I think, is a challenge for us in making this world a little better place.
All right. Thank you so much, Greg. Let's go back to Riverside Church here. Martin Luther King Jr. making the case against American foreign policy in 1967. Take a listen.
I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. For the sake of those boys, for the sake of this government, for the sake of the hundreds of thousands trembling under our violence, I cannot be silent. For those who ask the question, aren't you a civil rights leader? And thereby mean to exclude me from the movement for peace, I have this further answer. In 1957, when a group of us formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, we chose as our motto to save the soul of America. We were convinced that we could not limit our vision to certain rights for black people, but instead affirmed the conviction that America would never be free or saved from itself until the descendants of its slaves were loosed completely.
Hold it. Let's hold it right there. So, Bill, I want to bring you here on two things Dr. King talks about. My government, the greatest purveyor of violence. Any politicians who says that today may not get elected. The saving the soul of America, the principle informing the founding of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. if we dial back several decades later to 2008 or 2007, before we saw the election of the nation's first black president, we go back to Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, Jeremiah Wright. His sermons became almost a political firecracker, if you will, when, his sermons included "God damned America, America is headed to hell." Fox News had a field day with those sermons. He was called anti-American. He was called all sorts of names. How could this be? If you love America, not forgetting that Jeremiah Wright actually served in the U.S. Marine. He's a veteran in his own right. All of those things came up because he had the nerve to say, God damn America, America is going to hell. And he almost, in the same vein, perhaps not as eloquent as Dr. King, but almost the same trail, running through the contradictions of the American experience, the contradictions of American democracy. Jeremiah Wright said that in 2007, 2008, and was nailed on the cross and was called anti-American. And it was done in such a way that it almost sank the campaign of Barack Obama.
Well, one of the things that we have to realize is that people will use what you say against you. And they did it with Dr. King after the on Vietnam speech. And they did it with Jeremiah Wright on the speeches that he made, or the sermons that he made over a period of a number of years. The point is this, and I don't want people to forget about it, is if you are a Christian minister, and I happen to be a Christian minister as well, and you begin to look at the theology of what they both were talking about. How can I address an issue as a piece? You have to look at it as a whole. And one of the things that Dr. King said to his critics was, I have worked too long and too hard against segregated public accommodations to end up segregating my moral concern. Justice is indivisible. And that's the point that both these two prophets, Jeremiah Wright and Dr. King, were seeking to make. But to the extent that people could isolate that and reduce it to a singular message and overlook them as Christian prophets, they made a mistake.
Let's go back to Riverside Church. Martin Luther King Jr. here saying his government is the greatest purveyor of violence and the saving the soul of America through the founding of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
From the shackles they still wear. In a way, we were agreeing with Langston Hughes, that Black Bart of Holland, who had written earlier, oh yes, I say it plain, America never was America to me, and yet I swear this oath, America will be. Now it should be incandescently clear that no one who has any concern for the integrity and life of America today can ignore the present war. If America's soul becomes totally poisoned, part of the autopsy must read Vietnam. It can never be saved so long as it destroys the deepest hopes of men the world over. So it is that those of us who are yet determined that America will be are led down the path of protest and dissent, working for the health of our land. As if the weight of such a commitment to the life and health of America were not enough, another burden of responsibility was placed upon me in 1954. And I cannot forget that the Nobel Peace Prize was also a commission to work harder than I had ever worked before for the brotherhood of man. This is a calling that takes me beyond national allegiances. But even if it were not present, I would yet have to live with the meaning of my commitment to the ministry of Jesus Christ. To me, the relationship of this ministry to the making of peace is so obvious that I sometimes marvel at those who ask me why I'm speaking against the war. Could it be that they do not know that the good news was meant for all men, for communists and capitalists, for their children and ours, for black and for white, for revolutionary and conservative? Have they forgotten that my ministry is in obedience to the one who loved his enemies so fully that he died for them? What then can I say to the Viet Cong?
All right, Dr. King, veering off briefly to the calling as a minister of the gospel, right? And this is where the challenge comes to pastors. It's almost as if when you listen to Dr. King's speeches, and you know the sense of the deeper sense of a spiritual optimism that he expresses. In my view, it's almost as if there is an inexcusable obligation on the side of preachers and ministers to do so more and to speak out more than they have been doing in the last decades after Dr. King's death.
Well, that really is true. And one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that if you truly love America, if you truly love Detroit, whatever you love, if you see it on the wrong path, you have to call it back to the path of righteousness. That's all Dr. King was doing in this speech in 1967, was calling America back to the ideals that it expressed in the Declaration of Independence and expressed in the U.S. Constitution. It's ironic that the country we were warring with, North Vietnam, after 1945, when it was seeking its freedom from not just the Japanese, but from the French, adopted parts of the U.S. Declaration of Independence as it sought to go forward as an independent country. So you a prophet calls the people back to the path of righteousness when that prophet sees them going wrong.
And no excuse why we shouldn't have that many ministers and that many churches in this city. And the voices that are speaking out about economic inequality is so small, the voices are so low, and they are so few. I mean, it's almost back to what Dr. King said in the Vietnam speech, that silence in itself is betrayal.
Well, it's one of those things where I think too many people these days are focused on their own lives and what's right for them as opposed to what's right for the greater community. And it requires a lot of courage to actually speak out as a prophetic voice and call people back to the path of righteousness.
To go against the war in Vietnam, to go against American foreign policy, to go against the entire military-industrial complex in 1967 requires not only courage, but it requires a certain degree of, I don't know what I should call it, optimism, but it's almost as if I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Well, yeah, you are, but you're also seeing